I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This interview is with Georgie Newbery, who runs Common Farm Flowers down in Somerset. Georgie sells British grown cut flowers year round via her website, and she also does wedding flowers. And she often gives talks and demonstrations, and I've been to one and it was brilliant, just really inspiring. And she also runs workshops at her flower farm. So I've been ordering bouquets from Georgie, I think pretty much since she opened, and although I've sadly never been the recipient of one, the people that have received them have sent me photos and they're always stunning. She's also an author of The Flower Farmer's Year and Grow Your Own Wedding Flowers, and she's just really an all-round cut flower guru. And she also gardens naturally without chemicals and takes a laid-back approach to pests, which is pretty impressive for a commercial operation. I started by asking her about the setup down in Somerset. Can you explain a little bit about your plot and why what you're doing and how you're doing it is important?
Well, our plot is a 7-acre plot, which when we came here 15 years ago was completely empty. It had been used for fattening cattle. So it was seeded with very thick ryegrass, really good for feeding cattle, but not very good for anything else. And our dream was to live in a sort of eco-paradise with bees and butterflies and enormous amounts of birds and so on. And so we thought that the flower farm would be a way to make a living, a modest living. I don't think I'll ever retire a millionaire from it, but a modest living and live with a very, very green garden at the same time. That was the general idea. In fact, we first of all decided, we thought we were going to be sort of straightforward market gardeners. But the flower farm came about because somebody sent me a bunch of flowers through the post at a point when I was beginning to despair slightly and thinking, I don't know, how am I going to make a living? And it was a real light bulb moment, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic. I will grow flowers and sell them because I could do it from home. I had very small children at the time, so it suited me very well. Anybody who's been on a workshop here will know that I always talk about being able to do things in 20-minute increments. And flower farming is a classic job that you can do in 20-minute increments. Mm. So that's how the flower farm came about. It's a 7-acre plot, but still about half of it is wild and is kept very much wild. So we've got orchards, we've got banks of willow trees, we've got about half a mile of hedging that we put in as 30-inch whips when we got here, all native hedging, which is now 20 foot high and 10 foot wide. Wow. And is amazingly full of wildlife. It is extraordinary. And the cut flower patches are very badly laid out. If you were going to be much more commercial than we are, you would lay out your cut flower arrangements in such a way that you only had to go to one place to cut everything, and you'd have a tap in every place where you wanted to cut everything. Instead of which, we have 5 smallish cutting patches interspersed with patches of wild meadows and orchards and so on, so that there is room for the wildlife to flourish between the cut flower zones, if you like. And that is really the point of the exercise, is to make the wild very successful and also make enough money to keep it going at the same time.
Okay. So is it true? I mean, a lot of people say have faith, stay patient, and eventually the ecosystem will establish in such a way that you don't really have a proliferation of any particular type of pest. Have you found that?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I can't sort of insist on it more. This year, I have never seen greenfly like it. I'm sure everybody's been complaining about the greenfly. And it was all over the roses, like explosion of greenfly on the roses. And I knew from experience that all I had to do was hold my breath. As the roses budded up, the greenfly got fatter and fatter and fatter and more of them. And duly, a fortnight later, along come the ladybirds. And they have stripped every single one. And the roses are now completely greenfly free. And I haven't sprayed them with soap solution. I haven't done anything to them. I've not, in the olden days, I used to squeeze them off. I have not done none of that. I've left everything, and the ladybirds have done their jobs. And also this year, another kind of huge light bulb moment for us. We were burgled in January.
Oh, no.
And the burglars took the hedge trimmer.
Oh.
And of course, Fabrizio, he won't have any old hedge trimmer from the nearest shop. He has to have a particularly special hedge trimmer. So it took too long to get the special hedge trimmer. So we didn't trim any of the hedges this year, not one. And as a result, we have got probably over maybe 2.5 foot more cover per hedge than we had before. And we have had an explosion of birds. I mean, absolutely explosion of bird life. We usually have masses and masses of magpies, and I know they take some of the baby birds. But this year, you're watching the baby birds. The magpies don't stand a chance. And the baby birds are incredible. And they, as well as the ladybirds, have been mowing the roses. Anything that's been covered in black fly or green fly, the birds, you just watch them working them. It's amazing. And a small goldfinch, a baby goldfinch, at the moment they're about less than half the length of their parents. So they're tiny. They're like absolutely tiny. And they are already ganging up. You know how goldfinches go around in huge gangs? And these little baby goldfinches are already ganging up, and they are working the flower farm really, really effectively. It's absolutely amazing. And we do have slugs, but, you know, when I'm working the dahlia patch, there are jackdaws just come along behind me, and I pick up the slugs out of the bed, fling them over my shoulder, and the jackdaw thanks very much. And then I do it again. The jackdaw goes, thanks very much.
That's fantastic.
I mean, it's really, really amazing. I always said that it would take about 10 years to get to really organic, if you like. So in that 10-year period, you will lose things to pest and disease. But we've now been here 15 years, and I know I sound ridiculous, but it is absolutely astonishing. The balance and the wildlife working the land with us. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
As I say, a lot of people say that, but actually having that leap of faith is another matter. So it's lovely to hear that you've done it, and it just keeps on getting better.
It is really hard. This year's thing, I have a real thing about people spraying their lawns for leather jackets, which I totally understand. My mother, you know, she's a great sprayer of lawns, and she always gets the moss man in to get rid of the moss, because that's her generation, and she has she doesn't have very much lawn, but it's perfect. I would never, ever spray a lawn, and I'm standing in my studio now, looking out the window, and half an hour ago, when it was raining, there was a parliament of rooks working the lawn, and then along come the woodpeckers, and they work the lawn. They're hungry. We've got thrushes and blackbirds on another patch of grass, and they've worked out their own territories, and so the thrushes and the blackbirds work one bit, and the corvids and the woodpeckers work another bit. And it's brilliant to watch. I mean, it's really sort of exciting. And if I had sprayed my lawns, then those poor old birds, we've got a population explosion of birds because we didn't cut the hedges. So what would they have to eat?
Yeah, no, it's very true. Yeah. I love the idea of the gangster goldfinches.
Yeah, they are. They really... in French, they're called a voliere of goldfinches, which is a flight of goldfinch. But of course, in the French for burglar, for thief, or something being stolen is voler. So I think it's a thievery of goldfinches.
Yeah,
they're just so naughty.
Probably right. Well, I mean, I got your book. So, I mean, I love the idea, obviously, of what you're doing, but I got your book when it came out in 2014. That was the Flower Farmer's Year. And in it, you rail a bit against our love affair with imported and chemically treated cut flowers. And I just wondered, I was kind of flicking through it again yesterday, and I wondered how much you feel that like things have changed in the 5 years since you wrote that book with regards to the cut flower industry.
There's been a huge sea change in public opinion, and it's amazing. The British Flowers movement has really taken off. I think that there's an organisation called Flowers from the Farm, and I think they now have 400 odd members from a standing start. And those are all small flower farms. I mean, not huge industrial organisations. A lot of them are tiny backyard gardeners. But to have at least 400 people in this country growing flowers with the objective of selling some of them is, I think, a huge leap from where we were when we started out in 2010. And I think what's fantastic is that the big names in the floristry industry have really dived onto the idea and are really pushing it. So people like Shane Connolly and Simon Lycett and, the famous florists are really encouraging and really joining in with the idea that we grow really wonderful quality flowers in the UK, which are not the same as those imported from the rest of the world because they're lighter, fresher. They won't travel out of water, which makes them difficult to sell if you're a big international flower business. And so things like the Amimajus and all the lovely umbellifers and just the unusual flowers that wouldn't necessarily travel terribly well from South America or Africa are doing really, really well. And the knock-on effect of that is the fact that, of course, the gardening world is becoming very conscious of its habitual use of plastic, and so has the floristry world become very conscious of its habitual use of plastic. So along with a consciousness that actually there are fantastic flowers grown in the UK available year-round, let's use them without using not just chemicals, but let's not use any floral foam. And so the whole movement has become much more integrated, if you like, which is absolutely brilliant, I think.
And what are some of the worst offenders that you could buy, and why are they particularly bad?
Well, I think it's the whole process. Mm-hmm. So, for example, not everybody does this, but there are big flower farms in South America, for example, where the roses are grown in tunnels, and the plastic on those tunnels is changed relatively frequently, depending on the light levels and the time of year, which is already a lot of plastic to be changed. And then the people who work there, and this is not every single flower farm, but there are some places where this is how it works. The people who work there work in the tunnels, and of course they're boiling hot. They're like 40 plus degrees, boiling hot. And so the people are supposed to be wearing protective clothing because the air is a miasma of fungicide and other chemicals to keep the roses perfect. But of course they don't necessarily wear all the protective clothing because they're already boiling hot. And it's boring and annoying, and there isn't necessarily somebody making sure they wear a mask and all of that stuff. So those people then are living in a miasma of chemicals. They cut the roses, and they cut them in bunches of 50, which are then sent into a shed, which is kept very, very cold. So the people who work in the shed are wrapped up as if they're in the North Pole and are also supposed to be wearing masks because they're working a lot with more fungicide. And so what they then do is they take these bunches of roses, 50 of them at a time, and they dunk them head first in fungicide. So the people doing this are walking around ankle deep in fungicide. I mean, this is not every rose, obviously, but a lot of it is this case. That you then buy roses that have been dunked in fungicide head first, and they are then pulsed with various different chemicals, including silver nitrate, which is the traditional way of making flowers last longer, because what silver nitrate does is it prevents the flower from producing ethylene, which is the ripening gas that you get from bananas and tomatoes and things. It's the same process. And if you prevent the flower from producing that gas, then it will last longer. So your poor old rose has been dunked head first in fungicide, and then it's treated with silver nitrate, and then it is packed up and sent off on its way. Often, not always, there are incredible growers in the world, so I'm not saying everybody's the same, but nevertheless, there are growers or international flower dealers who fly these boxes of very highly dealt with chemical-treated roses across the world in aeroplanes, which then fly back to their home country empty.
Oh, my God.
And
that's outrageous.
And there are great growers who fly, make sure that they use the holds of planes that then have people upstairs. And so there are great growers, and I would never give you a name of anybody, but there's a fantastic book which you can read called Gilding the Lily. I can't remember the name of the author, but it is the story of the international cut flower trade, and it is mesmerizing, absolutely mesmerizing. And that's where I get this story of the dunking of the roses. So when the roses finally end up on your kitchen table a week or two later, You know when they half open, and the reason they only half open, they will never open properly, is because they've been over-treated with silver nitrate. So they half open, and then they rot from the inside. And the reason they rot from the inside is the fungicide never got there.
Wow.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, hideous.
So when I see a bride walking down the aisle coyly dipping her nose in her imported roses, I just want to go, don't do it, you don't know what you're breathing in. Or worse, people have lovely rose petals and they scatter them on cakes or they put them in champagne. And you're like, no, you don't know where that rose has been.
No, that's terrible. I mean, you don't... This is the problem with everything. A lot of things, you just don't stop and think. It's only when you hear somebody like you who knows kind of the backstory that you actually go, oh, God, what have you been doing?
I don't think anything is anybody's fault, especially. It's just a system that grows conveniently to suit a market. So the people growing the roses, people cutting the roses, there is a market out there that wants to buy them. But having said that, the more people who wake up and would rather smell roses than not be able to smell them because they've been over-treated with silver nitrate, so they have no scent. You know, every time anybody thinks twice, that's one more time that we don't do something terrible to the earth. And that's the only way we can do it, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. We've got to vote with our feet, definitely.
Yeah, we've just got to, exactly. I mean, and it's just millions and millions and millions and millions of small gestures change the world.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's encouraging. So on that point, I was going to ask you later, actually, but I might ask you now. What are your favourite scented flowers to grow?
Oh, well, in front of me, I have got a big vase of sweet peas,
lovely.
Which really are why I started the whole business. And the scent of sweet peas it's like when you get your first one of the season, I sort of walk around with it in front of my nose, getting drunk on it. And then by the end of the season, I'm sort of nose blind to it.
Oh.
The sweet peas are amazing. And I love roses. They're really fantastic. But also, I've been cutting a lot of sweet rocket recently, and I turn the corner into that patch of the garden, and I can smell it before I can see it. And Sweet William and the pinks at this time of year are absolutely fantastic.
Oh, they are, yeah.
But there are all sorts of funny other smells. Like, I love the smell of Ami Majus when you cut it. It's a sort of very green, rubbery smell. And I love the smell of when you first cut dahlias. The cutting of them has a really interesting scent. So not so sweet necessarily, but, interesting. And I love to put dill in bouquets because I love the smell of dill.
Oh, I do too, yeah. Yeah, I really love it.
Yeah. There's so much, isn't there? You walk around the garden and you're like, oh, I have a bit of that, and I have a bit of that. And it all smells delicious. Last winter I did the most successful foliage in the garden was bay last winter. I think maybe because of my bay was maturing a bit, and finally there was quite a lot to cut. And, oh my gosh, the scent of fresh bay in the winter is just magic.
Well, actually, that, again, takes me on to another question, which was, you have got a chapter in your book about shrubs, and you say, quite rightly, that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think that they were involved in cut flowers, but obviously they are. And what are some of your favourite ones to use?
Well, my absolute favourite are 2 or 3 different kinds of Physocarpus. I think if you have a cut flower patch, I would hedge it in Physocarpus. And I don't know if it's got an ordinary name. But there's a lovely yellow one called Darts Gold, which is brilliant, a really good zingy yellow. And then there's Diablo, which is that lovely dark red. And they're just the most useful. I think they're fantastic. For the winter, I would have Brachioglottis, which sounds a bit supermarket car park, but silver foliage is really great, and it doesn't mind being cut, and you can put it in your Christmas wreath, and it's really, really useful.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I was thinking as well, at some points in the year, there must be times when everything's not quite so abundant. Are there things that really, like you said, the bay, are there things that really get you through those leaner periods?
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm lucky in the winter. We have a 30-week season, so we start on the 1st of April, aim to have a fully functioning, producing cut flower patch on the 1st of April until about the 15th of November. And then between the 15th of November and the 1st of April the next year, our Cornish colleagues keep us going because they don't freeze and they don't necessarily heat their tunnels. but they have a lot under cover and it's just protected from the weather. And so we'll have ranunculus and lovely anemones and narcissi and all those gorgeous things all the way through the winter. They are fantastic. Without them, we would get stuck. But the idea is in the 30 weeks that we do have a cut flower patch in full flower, the skill is to keep sowing seed because you will run out otherwise. If you think you can put a cut flower patch in April and sit back and enjoy the fruits of your labours until November, then the answer is no. So during that 30-week season, I chopped my season up into 5 patches, 6 weeks long, and I aim to have 5 chunks of flowers to cut.
Okay, so it's a constant cycle.
It's a constant cycle, yeah. So this lovely rain that we're supposed to be getting later on, if it hasn't rained yet, by the time I've finished spoken to you and I've done my flowers and got them boxed up ready to go, this weekend I've planted nearly 1,000 gladiolus.
Wow.
A bit late,
yeah.
But think about it, glads flower 100 days-ish after you plant them. So I'm going to have a nice crop for mid-September onwards. So a month ago, I put the first 1,000 in. I'm now putting another 1,000 in.
Wow.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so in a garden, you would do all that in one go. But for you, you've got to stagger it. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of organisation.
I stagger everything. So I'm beginning to clear the first of the biennials. So things like my wallflowers are going to come out. So I've got some little patches of empty space. So I am, hopefully before the end of this week, all my leftover zinnia seed and cosmos seed and everything will go straight in the ground. So it's a final fling. Literally flinging it. I've got 5 of those. Let's throw them in.
Well, you've got to make the most of your space. If you're doing it commercially, then obviously you've got to,
If I have empty beds, then weeds grow there, and I don't want to grow weeds.
No, quite. So this is always a question that I'm faced with when I did a little tiny bit of flower arranging. I'm not an expert by any stretch. But people say to me, is there anything you absolutely cannot use as a cut flower? And are there things that we've been taught that you can't use as a cut flower, but actually you can, it's just the conditioning? Can you think of any sort of prime examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I have never been able to condition is acanthus leaves. I've tried nearly everything in my garden. Will be fine. Acanthus leaves, I just haven't ever made them work. But I have to say I haven't tried for a while, and I expect, being a bit more experienced now, I might be able to do it. I mean, they're kind of large and exciting structurally, but I'm not sure I'd need them anyway. But I would say that there is nothing in the garden that is sacred. I would cut absolutely everything. I'd give it a go. The skill, however, is not cutting at a bad time. So don't cut in the middle of the day when it's boiling hot and the sun on the back of your head, and then walk around with something out of water for half an hour and expect it to recover. I would say always cut early in the morning when the sun is not hot on your head yet, and cut straight into water. So if you're going to do it at all, even on a small scale, I would have a little trolley, and I'd put buckets of water in my trolley and set off in the sparkling dawn and cut the flowers straight into water. So I cut them, I strip the foliage, I cut them at an angle, I get them straight into water, and as a result, I very rarely even sear anything.
I'll tell you what I've never ever got on with is Cotinus, which is a shame because it's amazing.
Ah,
it's really
yes,
great
well.
I'm doing it all wrong, aren't I?
It's a question, I think, far be it for me to tell other people how to do it, but I think Cotinus is very sappy and full of new growth really until quite late in the season.
Mm-hmm.
And people love it because it has these gorgeous big round leaves and it smells delicious when you cut it. Again, it's one of those rubbery, gorgeous, rich scents. I would say don't cut Cotinus at all. Don't use it in floristry until late in the season. So I won't cut mine until at least September.
Ah, yes.
Because the sap has stopped rising and the leaves are mature and they hold really nicely.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. No, I've got not a clue. I literally just go around with secateurs and just hack into things. So, yeah, any advice is welcome.
Well, anything with large, if you think about it sort of logically, anything with really large leaves that transpire a lot, early in the season, are going to be floppy because they lose a lot of water out of their leaves and drink slowly up their stems. So things like the Physocarpus, which they're not enormous leaves and they can be quite floppy, but also you tend to cut Physocarpus on new growth. So it starts shooting quite early in the season, and I'm cutting it now, and I'm cutting 25, 30-inch stems, which is new growth. So that growth is really happy to drink because it's not woody. Whereas if I were cutting Cotinus now, I would be cutting very big leaves, and they haven't really grown their long new stems for the year yet. So you'd be cutting into wood, which is a much less spongy material for it to drink up. And then it transpires a lot from the big leaves and drinks more slowly and flops.
Okay. You've really made an art of it. I love the fact that you're observing everything and you're almost treating it as a research project. It's brilliant, which is why your books are so good, because it's just clear information based on your knowledge, which I love. So one last question I was going to ask you, which is, I'm always mindful that not everybody who's listening has got a great patch of land or a big one. If you had a really small garden or even a balcony and you only had room for maybe a few pots, what would you put in them?
I would always grow sweet peas because they're so quick and easy. But if I was growing them in pots or a dry garden, they need very rich, moisture-retaining compost. So I wouldn't ever plant a sweet pea seed in an old pot. I'm always telling people that seeds, it's really worth giving them what I call cashmere blankets. So, because, you know, if you're propagating babies, give them a cashmere blanket like you might a real baby. So have some really lovely, expensive, posh, smarty pants, peat-free compost and keep it really, really well watered, and the sweet peas should get away and do really well. So I would have sweet peas, and if I had no space, sweet peas, I would grow Ami Majus because I love the froth of it. You know, if I had no space at all, but I had to choose one umbellifer, I'd have Ami Majus. But again, if it were in a pot, it would need lots and lots of water because it would go over quickly. All annuals ever want to do is germinate, grow, flower, set seed and die. So having them in the garden to cut, we're sort of conning them into keeping them alive longer. I would then have a rose, and if I had no space at all, I would use a wall and grow the rose up a wall, because I expect
you would find a
if
way.
you have no space, you've still got a wall.
Yeah.
So I might have something like a Shropshire Lad, which will flower all summer long. They're very, very heavy-headed roses, but you can use the rest of the material that you've got to support it in your arrangements. And then I would probably have a herb of some kind. Of all the herbs, if I was only going to have one, I'd have mint. And if I was only going to have one mint, I would have pineapple mint, which is variegated and very pretty and and lovely with a sweet pea, and it's a very soft, good colour.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Oh, all right. One last question. What is the colour of choice for brides in 2020?
I have no idea.
Oh, really? Oh, no. I thought people might be coming to you already and saying, oh,
Well, funny enough, whatever anybody says is the colour of choice and is the colour of the brides, it's never what they ask for.
Oh, interesting.
In my increasing experience, you know, there's a moment in November where everyone goes, next year's Pantone. And this year's Pantone is hot coral, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Or some kind of hot peachy colour. Nobody has asked me for hot peach.
Oh,
not
interesting.
One.
Fine. They're all playing it safe.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think perhaps the way that we work makes us a bit unusual. But people, they will either ask for sort of like my bride this weekend. I've got two, and this weekend is pink and orange one because they're having a sort of tropical wedding. So that's fine. It's all the pink and orange out of the garden, and the other one's all white.
Ah, okay.
And that's fine. And then the following weekend, there's lots of lilac this year, which is absolutely not the colour that the Pantone people say it is.
It's not at all.
And weirdly, I'm having a real thing for blue.
Oh,
and
okay.
So I suspect that when they say what the Pantone is in November, I bet it's a bluey colour.
Oh.
Because I had a real thing for peach last
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I still not quite got over that.
Yeah, and suddenly it's this year's colours. I don't think it makes us particularly brilliant, but we're all very influenced by what we see in the press and, you know, magazines and on telly. And And it will be that there has been, over the last 18 months, 2 years, a lot of sort of peachy, corally colours, which have suddenly inspired us to like a colour that we might have thought was quite 1980s.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You definitely tap into it, whether you're doing it consciously or not. You're definitely tapping in, because quite often I'll go, oh, I think that's coming up. And then the next thing you know, it is. And everybody's thought the same. So, yeah. It's probably mind control. They're probably brainwashing us all.
I think we're being brainwashed by someone. Anyway, you heard it here first. Blue is the colour.
Blue, 2020. Thanks very much, Georgie. Please do check out commonflowers.com, where you can order Georgie's books, and you can check out her workshops and, of course, order some of her beautiful flowers. And on a final note, I just wanted to say that this episode more or less marks the 1 year anniversary of the podcast. And I wanted to say a really heartfelt thank you for listening, and thank you for your support and for sharing the podcast, for your reviews, for your wonderful comments and feedback, and for sending me photos of your gardens, and for your invitations to meet up for coffee, and for the interactions that you've had with guests. And also, thank you for your donations on my GoFundMe page, and to the amazing patrons who have got enough faith in what I'm doing to donate to the podcast regularly. And I know I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to learn from my experiences on the podcast and to produce a better product for you to listen to. Some things have fallen by the wayside over the past year, such as my blog, which I find really hard to write regularly, and I think I'm much happier recording content, apparently. And some things have worked out better than expected. I thought I wouldn't be recording every week, but I am, and I'm loving it. And I didn't realise that guests would be so generous with their time and their knowledge, but they've all been incredible, and I would like to thank them all too. So for the coming year, my aim is to make the podcast more widely known, and you can help me with that by sharing any content that you find interesting on social media or by word of mouth, and that actually helps me immensely. And I might be in a position to accept paid advertising in the next year, but do you know what? I really don't want to. I think it disrupts the listening experience, and I wouldn't feel that happy accepting advertising unless it was a product that I use and genuinely believe in. And even then, I think I'd feel a bit compromised. So I'd really like to grow my Patreon subscriber base and perhaps launch some affiliate products, but I'm going to play that by ear, to be honest. So my main aim is to keep bringing you interviews with amazing guests. And if there's anyone you'd like me to speak to that I haven't already, please let me know. I have a spreadsheet with details of every guest that's been suggested to me by a listener, and I promise I will get round to as many as I can. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you next Tuesday. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps, and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.